some reason, I just couldn't think about it. There wasn't like a watershed moment that inspired me, but I felt, after we did our last talk on vocabulary and talking about different words in the Bible, I really felt like God was inspiring me with different things to talk about. And that is something I've honestly never really experienced before, but I really felt like, God was using me through the talks and things that we've had up here, that he wanted to continue to use me. And that's a really good feeling, because you feel like, God has a purpose for you. So I was thinking about all these different things that we could talk about, or things that, I could bring out. And for some reason, God inspired me to do this, is different mountains in the Bible. I really like to learn, I'm going to say thematically, meaning like through the Bible, we can take different verses and we can delve into that verse and what it means. For me, I really like learning when people can take, broad ideas or broad things and bring them out all through the Bible and see how they come together as one. And for me, I learned so much more that way about the Old Testament and the New Testament, and about what God is saying across these different books in the Bible to deliver one particular message. So in the same way, I felt impressed to do this. I felt like I wasn't a good person to deliver this, because I'm terrible at geography and locations and distances. So John knows I'm really bad with directions. Even having grown up here and trying to describe on where to go. I even thought, like when I was in college one time, we had a class that we had to walk across and into the hospital and down into. We walked there every day because it was our anatomy lab. And it was after class, and we all kind of just followed along. So I just always followed where everybody else knew where to go. And it came a time where I was by myself and I had to get there. I'd walk there like all year, and I could not find my way to go the same place because I was just following everybody else where they were going. So directionally, I'm not very good, but I feel like what God has spoken to me through learning about these things, is more about the Spirit and more about the meaning of what he's trying to bring out to us. So in the Bible, they are described through imagery, and there's a significance that they carry. So God uses mountains and valleys to describe his power, illustrate high moments, and also obstacles. And I feel like, living in this area, I'm very, desensitized to mountains. We most of us here grew up in the mountains. We've been surrounded by mountains, and it's really, to me, we haven't traveled west. I've not seen the bigger Rocky Mountains or anything like that, but I've seen pictures of it where you have mostly flat land, and then above it rises a big, huge mountain range. And that is just, it's a sense of awe and majesty. We see God's creation, what he can do. Mostly in this area, we're surrounded by mountains. So they kind of cocoon within us, and we just take for granted, their protection and their majesty. We all go up to High Knob and we look over and we can see, and that just gives us a sense of, that there's things bigger than us, that there's a perspective other than what we have when we go and we stand in these high places. So we're kind of, to me, I'm desensitized to it until we maybe go to areas that are flat, and then you have a road and it just goes straight and there's no curve, and you just don't see those things rising up. So for me, not only, am I geographically challenged, but I'm also kind of spoiled by the beauty and protection that mountains give us. So I think, we all kind of need to step out and kind of see these places for what they were in the Bible. a lot through the Old Testament, they called them the high places. And this wasn't just a place that was of a godly place. There were a lot of pagan worship, and even they revere these high places of places where they would do sacrifices and worship. It was just a sense of a location that was bigger than them and somewhere distant, and it was like a revered place that they went to. In the Bible, there's certain mountains where God meets people in those high places. And it's kind of like what I was describing, when we go to High Knob, when we look over Flag Rock, when we're standing on, those rocks and looking over, I feel like we all have that sense of also kind of reflecting inside us. Like there's just a sense of, this is bigger, this is laid out before me, and I'm just a small person here. Like, who am I? What is my worth? So there's always this reflective moment. And it's in those moments too where we look inside ourselves that God is able to meet us, because no longer are we looking out. We're thinking inward, and God can meet us there. Mountains are seen as stable and unmoving. They're big forces. In order to move a mountain, I think of going over to Pikeville and how long they worked to create that cut through there. They were carving away and blowing away on that for years and years. And still, today you can just see, when you drive through those cut throughs, how many layers and years that this dynamite had to blast through. So this is not something that could easily be moved. It's something that's strong and stable and a force. And God uses that and that imagery for us to relate to and to meet us in those places. And something that we don't always think about too is that a mountain is somewhere where we must move upward from a valley. All of us have been through difficult places in our life in those valleys, and it's being able to look and see that there is something higher, that there is somewhere else that we can go to. And I think of that song, I'm Climbing Up the Rough Side of the Mountain, and Daryl's talked about that a lot of times, that if it was a smooth incline, that there would be no place to put our footing. So there is a work upward that we have to do to get us out of the valley. It's not a smooth transition up. Like there are obstacles, but there is purpose in attaining that. There's purpose from us going from these low places to these high places. So I have a few Bible verses here to talk about how the Bible illustrates the significance of mountains in terms of their power. I won't sit this down here. It's too distracting. This first verse is in Isaiah 2, chapter 2, verse 2. In the last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains. It will be raised above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. I don't know about you all, but when I read that, like that sets in my mind, and I know Janet teaches imagery in her English class, and this just sets to me, like you can see, in the last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established. Established is set forth in something to continue to carry on as the chief of the mountains. It's above everything else. It will be raised above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Also here, it is not by force nor by it is not by force nor by strength, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of heaven's armies. Nothing, not even a mighty mountain, will stand. That's such a powerful verse when we think about mountains being unmoving. And the Lord said, it's not by force nor by strength, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of heaven's armies. Nothing, Not even a mighty mountain will stand. So these things that we revere and we go and we travel to, the Lord is so powerful, he can just wipe those things away, wipe them flat. But also as a place that we go to, a mountain, to attain kind of that spiritual inwardness and awe and majesty. Mountains also, as I talked about earlier, are also a symbol of obstacles, something that we have to climb, to overcome. And we see that here in 1 Corinthians 13:2. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I'm nothing. I think that verse is so powerful because we live in a day and a time, not that we see necessarily prophecy or these big miracles being accomplished, but that is something, if we saw those things, if we saw, blinded eyes to see, if we saw the dead raised, if we saw cancer being cured, we would think that is it. That's it. That's the Spirit of the Lord. That has to be what that is. And it may be, but this verse says, if they could do all that and remove mountains and have all this power, but they didn't do it from a place of love, it says, I'm nothing. Nothing. And I think that we can get caught up in that vision of being so accomplished and doing all these things and achieving and seeing just the propelling forward of the gifts. But if we do that from a place of trying to attain that for ourselves and not from like the true meaning to reflect God, like we're trying to be the sun and reflect, we're not trying to be moons and reflect the sun. If we're trying to be the center and not doing that from a place of love, then what does the Bible say that is? Nothing. Nothing. Next, in Isaiah 54:10, though the mountains be shaken and the hills be removed, yet my unfailing love for you will not be shaken, nor my covenant of peace be removed, says the Lord who has compassion on you. I think it was when I got into these verses that I really felt like, God, this is why you're wanting me to talk about this. This is why this is so important, because it says, excuse me, it says in our lives, though things be turned upside down and things happen to us and we question why. And God says here, though the mountains be shaken and the hills be removed, though your life be turned upside down, yet my unfailing love for you will not be shaken, nor my covenant of peace be removed. When these things are so big in our lives to upend us, that is how much stronger that the Lord is, that something is so big that it could affect us in that way, but the Lord is even bigger to uphold us. And finally here, and I think this is a verse that most of us are familiar with in Matthew 17:20. And Jesus said to them, because of your lack of faith, I tell you with certainty, if you have faith like the grain of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here, and nothing will be impossible to you. I think about that verse a lot because I think what a small amount of faith it would take, and who can move a mountain? Who can move a mountain? But I think in mountains in our lives, of doubt and of questioning and death and sickness, those mountains can be overcome with faith, having trust, not knowing how things could work out, but just knowing that God, because back here, because the mountains are shaken and the hills are removed, yet his unfailing love for us will not be shaken and not be removed. So within the Bible here, there are several different mountains and mountain ranges that's talked about. Mount Ararat, where the ark has landed. Mount Carmel, where Ezekiel brought down the fire. And I've abbreviated and just kind of highlighted the more important things that have happened on each one of these mountains. On Mount Sinai, where Moses was delivered the Ten Commandments. Mount Horeb, where he saw the burning bush and God called to him and told him his name. Mount of Olives, where Jesus ascended. There's Mount Zion, Mount Tabor, where we think the transfiguration took place, and also Mount Moriah, which was the foundation of the Jewish faith, where Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac, and also later where Solomon built his temple within Jerusalem. So we're not going to go through every single one of these. I'm going to highlight just a few and some of the bigger ones here. We're going to talk about Mount Ararat, Mount Carmel, Mount Sinai, Mount Tabor, Mount of Olives, and then finally Mount Zion. And to me, there's also kind of like an increasing significance within each one of these mountains and what it can mean for us today. I've also included a map there that has most of those mountains listed, but some of these are outside of that scope. So let's start with our first mountain, Mount Ararat. Mount Ararat is known today as it's a stratovolcano in Turkey, whose tallest peak is 16,854 feet. It's pretty tall. A stratovolcano is a volcano that's a tall peaked volcano that forms its lava over time and increases in size. The exact biblical location of Mount Ararat is not known. There is a Mount Ararat, and this is where it's located today, and it's thought to be the place where the ark landed, but that is not firmly established. There's several other mountains where they think that the ark has landed. And we can see the biblical account of this in Genesis 8:4. Then in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. And this is where we first see it mentioned. It's also mentioned again in 2 Kings 19:37. Then it came about as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, that Adremelech and Sharezer killed him, the king of Assyria, with the sword, and they escaped to the land of Ararat, and his son became king in his place. So this is a location where several different things have happened that have been brought out in different biblical accounts. Modern day Mount Ararat is located in the country of Turkey. And there's also something called the Ararat anomaly, which we're going to talk about in just a second, but I thought Libby would find this interesting. Armenians hold that they are descendants of Japheth, because what they believe is that the ark had landed on Mount Ararat in Turkey, and then you can see there the location of Armenia is just east of Turkey. They believe that the descendants of Noah, of Japheth, who's Noah's son, then came into Armenia and established most of that country. So the coat of arms of Armenia, actually in the center of it, if you look closely there, has an image of the ark. I thought that was interesting. Oh, I bet that was beautiful. There's also something called the Ararat anomaly, and this is something that was photographed, an image that was photographed by the U.S. Air Force pilots in 1949 as they were flying over in this secretive mission. And what they believe there is a structure where they think that the ark could have landed and possibly be buried beneath the surface, which is mostly ice. Some scholars think that that's probably impossible because when the ark landed, I mean, and they don't really know what gopher wood was, and they know that it was covered in pitch, but they question, could that have survived this many thousands of years afterwards, when people would have probably used that for firewood and used it and broken it down in pieces over time if it was a structure that had rested there. But there's a lot of, it seems to be kind of one of those conspiracy theories, like could it be under the ice and they can't go there because it's in like a protected area. So there's a lot of things that you can get into in the internet over that one. For us, the significance of Mount Ararat, other than Libby being able to look through a stained glass and see it rising up in the distance, which seems very beautiful, it's a place where the ark landed. So it's a resting place where when the floods receded is a symbol of hope and renewal after destruction. And it's also a symbol of the preservation of life and a promise that God would not destroy the earth in this way again. And here we have a picture of these, I guess that's cattle grazing in Mount Ararat there in the distance. All right, and we're going to move on to Mount Carmel. I always want to put something extra fancy on this one and say Mount Carmel, but John's like, it's Carmel. So Mount Carmel is a high wooded mountain range in Israel. Carmel means a vineyard or a garden. And like Mount Ararat was 16,000 plus in elevation, this is 1,724. Who knows the elevation of Hanab? 4,500? I was trying to compare it all to Hanab, but then I was thinking it was like 5,000, but 4,500. So not as high. But to me, this like wooded range, it reminded me a lot of, the Hanab area, what that would look like. And this in the Bible brings about one of my favorite stories. And Mount Carmel in the Bible, what's happening during this time is Ahab and Jezebel. We've all heard her name before and know how evil she was. And they were the king and queen of Israel. And she was known for being evil because she worshiped Baal. And one of the key components in worshiping Baal was sacrificing. And people even sacrificed their children. And, God was very upset about this, saying this is practice I never taught you to do. When God called Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, but he provided a substitution for him. So he never intended for people to lay their children before a God in that way. But that's what Jezebel was doing, not only to children, but she did it to any prophet who claimed to worship God or to serve God. And she killed hundreds, I think it was, of prophets.
When you say abortion, is sort of on that line?
Of sacrificing children. They were doing it in a way, I guess at this time, as a way to prove their loyalty to Baal. So that was what was happening. And Elijah, he escapes from all this. And he says that, what you're doing is evil, and there's going to be no rain come until I say so, until God commands me to tell you. And so because there's no rain, it went for 3 years with no rain, and it brought about a big famine. People were starving. And then God comes back and he tells Elijah that it's time to present himself to Ahab. I can't imagine. I guess when we read things, we think, what if I was in their place? How would I do? And so Elijah is seeing all of the people that worship God be murdered and killed for what they're doing. And he tells them that, it's not going to rain. And then he goes in hiding during this time. And then God tells him, all right, it's time to go say hey to the king again. I would be terrified. But I want us to read this because, like I said, it's one of my favorite stories here. This is in 1 Kings 18:20, if you all want to turn there. So Elijah is commanded by God to present himself back to the king. And he does through Obadiah, and now we are in 1 Kings 18:20. So Ahab sent orders among all the sons of Israel. Let me get into the microphone just a little bit better. So Ahab sent orders among all the sons of Israel and brought the prophets together at Mount Carmel. Then Elijah approached all the people and said, "How long are you going to struggle with the two choices? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him." But the people did not answer him so much as a word. Elijah was putting the choice before him. Are you going to continue to follow Ahab and Jezebel? Serve Baal, if not serve the God. But they didn't have any answer. They didn't know who they were going to serve. Then Elijah said to the people, "I alone am left as a prophet of the Lord, while Baal's prophets are 450 men. Now have them give us 2 oxen, and have them choose the one ox for themselves, and cut it up and place it on the wood, but put no fire under it. And I will prepare the other ox and lay it on the wood, and I will not put a fire under it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God." And all the people replied, "That is a good idea." I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible translation, so yours may read a little bit differently. So they've got 2 oxen. One is over top of wood, and the other one is laying there bare cut up. And Elijah says, "Call on the name of your God, and I'll call on the name of the Lord. And the God that answers by fire, he's God." So Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose the one ox for yourselves and prepare it first, since there are many of you, and call on the name of your God, but put no fire under the ox." Then they took the ox which was given them, and they prepared it, and they called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they limped about the altar which they had made. And at noon Elijah ridiculed them and said, "Call out with a loud voice, since he is a god. Undoubtedly he is attending to business, or is on the way, or is on a journey. Perhaps he is asleep and will waken." He's got great confidence. He's not only so sure of it, he's making fun of them for them being so sure. So they cried out with a loud voice and cut themselves according to their custom with swords and lances until blood gushed out on them. They are wanting it so bad. They're wanting their Lord to show up so bad. When midday was past, they raved until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, but there was no voice, no one answered, and no one paid attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come forward to me." So all the people came forward to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. I think there, a lot of the altars of the Lord had been torn down so that they could build altars to worship Baal. So Elijah, and that sounds like a good message. He repaired the altar first there for a place of sacrifice. And then he took 12 stones corresponding to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Israel shall be your name." And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench around the altar, large enough to hold 2 measures of seed. Then he laid out the wood, and he cut the ox in pieces and placed it on the wood. And not only that, this is what happened next. And he said, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood." And he said, "Do it a second time." So they did it a second time. Then he said, "Do it a third time." So they did it a third time. The water flowed around the altar, and he also filled the trench with water. So not only was he so confident that he was making fun of them for calling out to their false god, but he laid the ox there and he said, "Douse it with water. It's still going to burn." And I think that water is still symbolic. Like we're doing a talk now on mountains, we could do a talk on water, and that would probably take us a long time to do. But he poured the water all around him. Then at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet approached and said, "Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that this people may know that you, Lord, are God, and that you have turned their heart back." Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell on their faces and they said, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." Then Elijah said to them, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Do not let one of them escape." So they seized them. Elijah brought them down to the brook of Kishon and slaughtered them there. So that's just such a powerful account to me, just the confidence that Elijah had, that he knew that the Lord could present himself and was going to present himself because he had called them. He had called Elijah to present himself, so he knew in his heart what the Lord had prepared, and nothing that we could see that we could do that we think would hinder God is going to hinder God. It's all meant for his purpose. So that's Mount Carmel in the Bible. Just one of my favorite stories, just about how God can show up when people really call on his name and have confidence and faith in him. Mount Carmel in the Bible is also mentioned in Isaiah 35:2. It says, "The deserts will become as green as the mountains of Lebanon, as lovely as Mount Carmel or the plain of Sharon. There the Lord will display his glory, the splendor of our God." And as I don't know why I'm talking about High Knob so much. It's because I'm geographically challenged, and that's the only mountain that I can relate to. But as I said earlier, it was like a high wooded mountain range. So the Bible uses that beautiful imagery and this flourishing kind of vegetation as a symbol also of the beauty of the Lord. We also see it mentioned in the Song of Solomon here, and this is, to the left is a modern translation. I'm not sure exactly which one it is, but it says, "Your head crowns you like Mount Carmel, the hair of your head like purple threads. The king is captured in your tresses." It sounds like a romantic poem, and it is to some extent. But on the right, we have the King James Version, which I prefer in this instance. It says, "Thine head upon thee is like Carmel, and the hair of thine head like purple. The king is held in the galleries." It sounds beautiful. All right, and here is another verse that brings up Mount Carmel in Nahum, chapter 1, 3-5. I don't know that I've ever heard anybody read through Nahum necessarily. But it says here, "The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and the Lord will by no means leave the guilty unpunished." I have heard that verse quite a bit. "In the gale and the storm is his way, and clouds are the dust beneath his feet. He rebukes the sea and dries it up. He dries up all the rivers. Bashan and Carmel wither. The blossoms of Lebanon wither, mountains quake because of him. So this could have been in our slide where we were talking about the power in mountains, and that's what he's saying, that, the Lord is slow to anger, but also great in power, and will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. Just because you don't see something happening now doesn't mean that the Lord hasn't handled it already going forward. And it says Bashan and Carmel wither. So this beauty that we see, this flourishing and growth in wooded area, what does it do? It just withers away, with the beauty and the majesty of God. Mount Carmel today actually is the site of a lot of very ancient civilizations and findings and relics, I'll say, architectural finds. It's where they have found a lot of Neanderthal skeletons, and they're also in layers. So going through layers, the skeletons get older, and they can date those back in. I guess they're trying to see what life would be like, at that time, some of the things that they had. One of them was just a ring that a young boy found, I think he was 14, found this year. I was just thinking 14 because I thought that's Eden's age. He found an ancient ring, and that's the ring that's pictured there to the left. And this is a picture of a goddess, and I can't remember which one it was. But during this time, in Greek culture, they worshiped different gods, and this is one of the Greek goddesses. And this was a 1,800-year-old ring that this boy randomly found on a hike on Mount Carmel. They've also found a necklace, and I looked back at this several times because I thought, is this number accurate? But it said that it was 12,000 years old. A necklace. I just think it's amazing that they would be making jewelry. Me and the girls have been making bracelets here lately, and 12,000 years ago they were making this jewelry here that you see, and it's maintained the test of time. There's also on Mount Carmel a Catholic religious order called the Carmelites that were founded in the year, well, you have to help me, 1209. At the site of Elijah's cave where Elijah escaped to. And then it's also the sacred sites of other religions, and there are other religions that I hadn't necessarily heard about, but it's just seen as a very spiritual mountain, not only to Christians, as now we've heard this account of in the Bible, but also of other religious sects. So the Mount Carmel, the spiritual significance after having, read this in Kings, and we all have this picture of Elijah and him bringing down the fire of the Lord for him to show and prove to the Israelites that this is God, not Baal. It's the beauty and fertility, but also that God is the supreme God. The supreme God. That there may be other gods that people worship in different ways, but there is one true God, and Elijah illustrates that. When he asked the people, who are you going to serve? Are you going to serve Baal, or are you going to serve the Lord? What did they say? Nothing. They had no answer. And when Elijah showed the people, they definitely had an answer after that. All right, I'm going to take a breather. Mm-hmm.
That the ocean at one time came all the way up to this area.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they found all the sea objects, starfish, and they found several items in the formation there.
Yeah, and that reminds me too, I don't know if y'all have ever been driving over into Kentucky, and I talked about them removing those mountains and how you can see all those different layers, and it goes down in time there. But sometimes you'll see the geology professors over there, and they're just standing there with a bunch of students who are writing stuff down, and they're looking at those rocks and layering them out and talking about all that, because
So that's even older than that piece of jewelry that they found at Nate. Was my main point.
yes. Yeah, and Evelyn, she's been learning about mountain ranges in the United States. And which mountain region do we live in, Evelyn? The Appalachian Mountains. And do you know a fact about it, Evelyn? They're the oldest mountain range in the United States, which I found interesting because I don't know why I thought the Rocky Mountains would be. I didn't know that there would be an age, so I thought all the mountains came about at the same time. So good job, Evelyn. Way to be quizzed. Way to be quizzed in public. All right, it's 10:47. I think we can get into the beginnings of Mount Sinai, because I feel like Mount Sinai, it's in the middle of our mountain talk here, but it also is kind of the transition point where I feel like God, where we can see and where we can begin to meet God, where the spiritual significance for it, for us, starts to grow. Mount Sinai is a location today, and it's talked about in the Bible, but it's kind of like Mount Ararat. Mount Ararat is mentioned in the Bible, but we're not exactly sure where the biblical Mount Ararat is, and this is the same for Mount Sinai. It's a granitic peak, and its exact location is unknown, as you can see there on the slide, but this is the geography of Mount Sinai and what it would look like. And, Mount Sinai is where God meets man. It's where he showed himself to Moses. And this is in another one of my favorite scriptures in the Bible, where God is going to show himself to Moses, and he tells him to hide himself in the cleft of the rock. And you can see here from this picture of the mountain range kind of how that would look like, what Moses was kind of backing into. This is completely opposite, from what we just talked about Mount Carmel, that is just flourishing and lush. This is granitic rocks. And I have here a map of, this is the Exodus out of Egypt that the Israelites took. And because this is a projected possible Exodus route, they don't exactly know where they went through. And because they can't pinpoint the exact travels that they took, they're also not sure of where Mount Sinai is located. In Exodus chapter 3:12, I will surely be with you, God said, and this will be the sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, all of you will worship God on this mountain. So this is it's a landmarker mountain to God. And he's saying before they brought them out of Egypt, that you're going to know that he has sent Moses when he's brought the people out of Egypt, and they're all worshiping on this mountain. So this is a very important mountain to God as a sign in Exodus. As I said, Mount Sinai is the mountain where God met man, where he came and revealed himself to Moses, where he delivered the Mosaic covenant. Oh, I wrote that. Delivered the Mosaic covenant. And this is in Exodus chapters 19 all the way through 31. So the Mosaic covenant is a very lengthy covenant. And when you read through that, it is some things like you can relate to. And then other things, it's very specific in the laws that they've laid out for them and how they want them to govern their household, what happens if somebody's animal kills another neighbor, how they're supposed to act. So there's all these really specific things that are laid out in the Mosaic covenant. And during this time, Moses, like I said, we always kind of put ourselves, not that we could, in Moses' situation, but here he is having this direct encounter with God, and God is telling him all these things on how to lay out people's entire lives, how they're going to structure this society. And so Moses is getting these down. He's getting the 10 Commandments delivered, and the people get so bored of waiting, like, we can't go to the mountain because if we touch it, we're going to die. So they just get down there and they're like so bored, like Moses isn't even coming back. And so in that time that Moses is having this encounter with God and writing down how they're going to live, the people, what do? They start worshiping something else. After God has delivered them, after he says, you're going to worship me on this mountain and this is going to be your sign, all these things had taken place, and yet they still created a golden calf. And when Moses gets down with the 10 Commandments, sees them worshiping something else, so mad. So he broke them. And after he broke them, then he had to go back up to the mountain. And this is, Paul illustrates this again in Galatians. So I think this is a good stopping point for us to come to. I hope you all have enjoyed this and gotten something out of this and been able to, now when you kind of read through the Bible and these mountains are mentioned, you can get like a visual image of what these things look like and, how God is using these to deliver messages to us and to help us to understand them better. So I appreciate you all listening to me, and we pray for this church service this morning that we can get even closer to God and meet him on the mountain that he wants us to worship him on. Amen. Amen.